Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we re-examined the battle between Rimuru and Veldanava through the perspectives of Guy, Velzard, Chloe, Milam, and Ramirez. The sheer irrationality of Rimuru's existence reignited hope among those who had already sunk into despair. In this episode, we will shift our focus to the duel between Rimuru and Veldanava again. Having lost Ciel, Rimuru was given a rare chance to transform back into Satoru, and step by step, he began forcing the creator god, Veldanava, into a corner. So, let's get started. As Rimuru's blade clashed with Veldanava's, every collision sent a violent shock through his arms. With time stopped, Rimuru's only option was non-magical recovery. Lacking healing magic and without Ciel's support, he relied on the biological traits of a slime, freely replacing cells throughout his body to instantly repair fatigue and damage. This combat style, which consumed no magic at all, became his most reliable lifeline. Through relentless training with Hakuro, Rimuru was able to trade blows evenly with the flawless Veldonava. Yet he quickly sensed something was off, a decisive mismatch that could not be ignored. The problem was height. At present, Rimuru maintained a sub-160-centimeter ordinary high school girl build, while Veldonava stood well over 180 centimeters tall. The disparity in reach was undeniable. Swordsmanship could compensate to a degree, but with Ciel gone, the one pillar he had always relied on, Rimuru concluded that every disadvantage had to be eliminated. He needed equal footing. To obtain a body better suited for combat, Rimuru decided to transform. He recalled that back when Ciel was still the great sage, he had once mimicked the appearance of his pre-reincarnation self, Satoru Mikami. But ever since Ciel had awakened, that male form had been rejected every single time, for one reason or another. Now that Ciel was gone, Rimuru adopted a "we'll cross that bridge when we get there" mindset and tried transforming again. To his surprise, it worked effortlessly. This confirmed that transformation was an innate slime trait, not a skill governed by authority, and Ciel was lying. In an instant, Rimuru shifted from a petite girl's frame into a tall, short-haired, sharp-featured man, the image of Satoru at his prime. When Veldonava cast him a skeptical glance, Rimuru simply replied that this form was better for fighting. And he was right. First came the improvement in handling. When he swung his blade again, it was still blocked, but the motion felt far smoother than before. Even if it was only psychological, that alone made it the right choice. Second came clarity of mind. Strangely enough, in this form, Rimuru felt no fear at all, even against the god who wielded every authority imaginable. Instead, his anger over Benimaru's injury and his indignation toward Veldonava's intent to destroy the world fused into a state of extreme calm. In that moment, everything snapped into place. The logic simplified itself. Once the opponent was defined as an enemy, the perspective changed completely. Rimuru established the simplest possible equation for victory: defeat Veldonava, and all problems would be resolved. Ciel had vanished with the assurance that Rimuru-sama's chance of victory is 100%, and that her master was the strongest. Believing those words and charging forward became the only truth worth following. Worries could wait until after the win. Rimuru stopped probing cautiously. Instead, he openly declared that he would defeat Veldonava first, and then ask whether he had changed his mind. Veldonava scoffed, dismissing Rimuru as nothing more than an overconfident automaton, a mere golem daring to spout nonsense. That arrogance no doubt was inherited from his original personality. Faced with the accusation of being a fake, Rimuru offered a firm rebuttal. First and foremost, I am who I am. Then came his uniquely Rimuru-style self-justification, a quiet philosophical debate about existence itself. While abilities like parallel existence allowed for the creation of duplicates, Rimuru had never been able to use it. Unlike Velgrind, he could not restore personalities or freely transfer consciousness. When it came to copying himself, there was an insurmountable limitation: The issue lay at the level of consciousness. And paradoxically, that very inability to replicate himself, this flaw of absolute uniqueness, proved that the Rimuru standing here was the one and only genuine article. The logic was admittedly shaky, but it was enough for Rimuru himself. Armed with that absolute confidence of being the real thing, Rimuru casually caught Veldonava's offhand slash. The battle surged into its fiercest phase. During the clash, Veldonava channeled an interference wave of soul destruction straight through the crossing blades. In theory, this attack should have been completely ineffective against soulless Rimuru. And yet, in reality, Rimuru still felt pain. Naturally, the god noticed it as well, and was visibly confused. Wasn't Rimuru supposed to be a soulless automaton, a golem? Why did an attack targeting the soul have any effect at all? Rimuru sneered inwardly at the god's confusion. While his true soul had indeed been taken, there was still a pseudo-soul, one he had fabricated himself, residing within his body. In Veldonava's understanding, a pseudo-soul could never substitute for a real one. Therefore, an attack meant to annihilate a true soul should not have been able to damage a mere imitation. Whatever the explanation, the current reality was simple. Rimuru no longer possessed a true soul. As a result, most skills and authorities tied directly to the soul were unusable. But ironically, this did not hurt him much. With Ciel usually handling those abilities, Rimuru had rarely relied on them himself anyway. Calmly, Rimuru took stock of the hand he still held, this time without Ciel's assistance. First came what was unusable. The ultimate skill lord of abundance, Shub Niggurath, was effectively gone. Authorities under Ciel's management, skill creation, skill duplication, skill gifting, skill storage, and the like, were beyond his comprehension. Rimuru had always treated them as none of his business, never bothering to learn how they worked. Now, he simply could not use them. But the usable powers turned out to be unexpectedly comprehensive. His slime intrinsic skills, universal perception, dragon spirit haki, universal shapeshift, all function naturally. In defense and mobility, multidimensional barrier remained perfect. The fact that he could move in stopped time proved that space-time domination activated even without conscious effort. Then there were the predation-based abilities, soul gluttony and imaginary space, both fully operational. Next came energy manipulation. When healing Benimaru earlier, Rimuru had successfully improvised, converting and utilizing energy from imaginary space via nihilistic collapse. Finally, there was the power of the true dragons. Rimuru could still feel his connection to Veldora. If he called out, the two sisters would likely respond as well. That meant true dragon release and true dragon nucleation were available whenever he chose to use them. The conclusion was obvious. Any authority belonging to God of Void, Azathoth, remained entirely under Rimuru's control. And luckily, those abilities were overwhelmingly combat-oriented. In other words, the power Rimuru needed to fight directly was not lacking at all. With preparations complete, Rimuru did not hesitate. He launched his offensive, drawing his beloved blade Elpis with full force. In a world where time was frozen, feints and clever tricks had low success rates and even lower meaning. The only correct answer was straightforward, head-on combat, trusting the technique he had honed through relentless training. Steel collided with steel. Veldonava caught the strike with his sword. His swordsmanship was flawless, yet through sheer concentration and an expanding field of perception, his ability to sense ever more infon, Rimuru miraculously matched the god blow for blow. Within the stopped world, Veldonava could not comprehend how this unassuming slime was holding his ground. Rimuru declared confidently that he was strong. One defining trait of this masculinized Rimuru was simple. He no longer seemed so lacking in confidence. After all, Rimuru-sama is strong. That was Ciel's judgment. To live up to that expectation, to uphold his master's dignity, Rimuru forcibly suppressed his instinct to run away and used that bold declaration to steel his resolve. Veldonava remarked that it was astonishing for such a small existence to grow this far through natural evolution, showing a flicker of surprise at the world he himself had created. Rimuru tried to seize the opening, asking whether Veldonava had perhaps regained interest in this world after all. The god cut that hope down instantly. A god's decision did not change. Negotiation was over. Rimuru realized he had been naive to even try. If the god's will was immovable, then there was no point in overthinking it. He cast aside all distractions, focusing solely on victory. Searching for that infinitesimal chance, Rimuru gathered himself and charged again. Before the battle, Rimuru had approached this fight with bleak pessimism, doing his best and giving up if it failed. Without Ciel, he had expected to be defeated almost instantly. Yet, once the clash truly began, he was shocked to discover that he could actually trade blows with the creator god. This was due to three factors. First was his physical advantage. Rimuru was profoundly grateful that he had reincarnated as a slime. Had he still possessed a human body from his previous life, he would have died instantly under this level of combat intensity. Second was Hakuru's training. Rimuru silently thanked Hakuru for the torture of the past. Those sessions, worse than punishment games, combined with a slime's exceptional physical resilience, formed the foundation that now allowed him to contend with a god. Third was the benefit of his current form. By transforming into Satoru, Rimuru's height now nearly matched Veldonava's, eliminating the disadvantage in reach. Rimuru even felt a spark of optimism. Maybe he could actually win this battle. He tried to use bluster to disrupt Veldonava's judgment. When he saw the god narrow his eyes in irritation, Rimuru felt oddly reassured. It proved that Veldonava's emotions could still be stirred. But Veldonava was not led by the nose. Coldly, he labeled Rimuru a far more troublesome anomaly than expected, and casually shoved him away. He decided to stop indulging Rimuru in a swordsmanship duel and revealed his true trump card. Raising his hand to the sky, Veldonava filled the heavens with countless blazing arrows of fire. In a world where time was stopped, normal magic should have been impossible. Rimuru was stunned. Gi revealed the truth. It was primitive magic, a pure power unrelated to the concept of time itself, akin to directly manipulating the laws of the world, consuming almost no energy, a despicably efficient weapon. Ramirez could also use such magic, but even after borrowing Rimuru's power to reach her adult form, she admitted she could not counter magic on this scale. Even so, primitive magic could not violate the law that in Fawn movement speed is constant. Between activation and impact, there existed a minute perceptual delay. It was a small comfort, but seemingly useless in solving the crisis. Veldonava declared that these flames would incinerate all of Rimuru's companions and loved ones. Even Velzard's absolute defense, complete fixation, would not withstand this primal force. The god's intent was unmistakable, to drive Rimuru into despair by slaughtering those he cherished. Veldonava's action, this act without any bottom line, completely enraged Rimuru. Rimuru declared that if Veldonava dared to go through with it, he would never forgive him. His mindset shifted decisively. Until this point, Rimuru had been searching for the possibility of reconciliation, hoping that after winning he could force the god to repent. After all, Veldonava was Milim's father, Gi's friend, and the creator of the world. Rimuru had not wanted to go that far, but the moment the god turned his blade toward Rimuru's most precious companions, that line was crossed. Negotiation collapsed entirely. If words no longer reached him, then only violence remained. Rimuru decided he would hold nothing back. This had to end, completely. Veldonava ignored Rimuru's warning without changing his expression, and coldly brought his hand down. The radiant arrows of primordial flame streaked across the frozen sky, each locking onto its designated target. Despair surged, and in the very next instant, within the stopped world, Rimuru's thoughts accelerated to their absolute limit. The countless flaming arrows were not aimed at Rimuru, nor were they aimed at Gi or the other top-tier fighters. They were locked onto everyone present who could not move within the stopped world. Once those arrows fell, aside from a tiny handful of elites, every important person Rimuru had met since reincarnating would meet the same end. all history, all achievements, all meaning of survival would be erased equally. At that moment, Rimuru abandoned his last escape route, the idea of doing his best and giving up if it failed. He remembered his early days after reincarnation, when he had wanted to live freely, unbound, even to die irresponsibly, if he felt like it. But meeting people like Rimuru had given him companions. Being relied upon had given him responsibility. It was those bonds that made him truly alive. If he had been connected to no one, he would have left this world long ago. If the world had entrusted its fate to someone as unreliable as him, then answering that expectation with everything he had was the only way he could live. That was Rimuru's final resolve. Rimuru cast his consciousness toward the sky-filling storm of fire. Through universal perception, he could identify each arrow, yet a massive doubt still gnawed at him. Could this hollow self, this being without a soul, really achieve defense on that level? At that moment of hesitation, he seemed to hear a familiar voice. "If it's you, my lord, then nothing is impossible." Whether it was an auditory hallucination or a bond reaching across time, that voice instantly connected the dots in Rimuru's mind. Ciel herself had once been nothing more than a skill, evolving step by step into a Manas. In theory, a Manas had no soul either, yet she could freely wield authority. If Ciel could do it, there was no reason Rimuru, her master, could not. If even his slime intrinsic skills still functioned, then there had to be a way. No more hesitation. Rimuru chose to stake everything. The rain of fire descended, despair about to claim all, and in the next instant, every single flaming arrow vanished the moment it touched its target. Rimuru had succeeded in defending. Veldonava showed a rare expression of shock. Rimuru forced himself to remain calm, adopting an air of course, this would happen to bluff his opponent. As for the mechanism, Rimuru had used soul gluttony. Even though Veldonava had employed primitive magic, as long as Rimuru could perceive the infon composing it, soul gluttony could instantly devour everything within perception range. After being refined through Gi's repeated use, soul gluttony had reached an entirely new level. Primitive magic or unknown authorities, if they could be perceived, they could, in theory, be eaten. It was a reckless gamble without Ciel's assistance, but Rimuru won the bet. With this real-world verification, Rimuru's confidence solidified completely. If he could perceive the entire battlefield, then no matter how many times Veldonava repeated that attack, Rimuru could nullify it instantly. Defense was proven. Now was the time to counterattack. Rimuru took a step toward Veldonava and issued a firm declaration. Emission-type attacks were completely ineffective against him. Veldonava's insistence on forcing primitive magic through, ignoring all warnings, shattered Rimuru's final restraint. An unprecedented fury surged within him, not only toward the god but also toward his own past hesitation. Because of his naivety and indecision, Benimaru was still unconscious. Moments ago, all his companions had nearly been annihilated. This was an undeniable misjudgment. Rimuru discarded all remaining sympathy. Whatever tragic reasons the god possessed were irrelevant. Compassion was a luxury of the strong, and he no longer had the right to indulge in it. If the other side showed no consideration and sought to trample dreams and hope unilaterally, then god or not, they were nothing more than an enemy that had to be defeated. That was all. Rimuru declared once more that he would defeat Veldonava. Without even giving the god time to respond, Rimuru activated instant motion, closing the distance in a flash. His left hand drove Elpis upward with full force. Veldonava barely managed to block the blade, but his stance collapsed. That was the opening Rimuru had been waiting for. His right fist, clenched tight, slammed brutally into Veldonava's unguarded face. The god was sent flying, crashing into the wall of the Heaven Tower before coming to a halt. Witnessing this, Rimuru felt his mind become crystal clear, as if all his worries had been blown away with that single punch. With the goal of landing the first hit accomplished, the next step was total victory. Rimuru approached Veldonava and coldly stated that he was not the only pitiable being in the world, mocking the god's immaturity. Rimuru knew full well that these words could rebound on himself. He was not someone who felt no pain. If his own companions were lost, he too might lose control, perhaps even go mad like Veldanava. Even so, if madness meant forcing tragedy upon the entire world, then someone had to stop it. Rimuru refused to say empty words like, "I understand your grief." Comfort from someone who could not share the same pain was nothing but hypocrisy. People had to stand back up from sorrow on their own. What others could do was accompany them, or correct them when they strayed. Which conviction was right would be decided by the victor. Rimuru felt his vision clear completely. No more confusion, no more hesitation. He would simply carry out his justice until this lost god was beaten back to his senses. After being sent flying by Rimuru's punch, Veldonava slowly rose to his feet and offered only a dismissive verdict. Utterly ridiculous. Clearly, the blow had caused no real damage. As Veldonava finally assumed a serious stance, Rimuru tightened his grip on his beloved blade, Elpis, and launched a probing slash. Veldonava neither dodged nor blocked. Rimuru's sword struck his shoulder directly, yet the sensation was like hitting solid iron with a wooden blade. The recoil was so violent that it left Rimuru's arm numb. Veldonava immediately counterattacked the moment Rimuru was left exposed. At the very brink, Rimuru reacted on instinct, instantly reverting to his slime form. Using the sudden change in volume, he narrowly avoided the blow, rolled away to create distance, and then shifted back into his Satoru form. Rimuru analyzed the situation at once. That rigid resistance came from multi-layer barrier. Worse still, he could feel his abilities being sealed. This was something akin to Yuki Kagurazaka's anti-skill. The current situation was brutal. In the stopped world, magic was unusable, which meant composite techniques that blended magic and swordplay, like Storm Break, were off the table. Purely physical attacks wrapped in aura could not pierce Veldonava's barrier, while magic itself was suppressed by the environment. Without Ciel present to instantly analyze primitive magic, Rimuru appeared to be out of options. Yet Rimuru did not give up. Instead, he dug through the tools he still had and recalled what he had done earlier while saving Benimaru, Nihility Collapse. His tactical concept was simple, yet reckless. Directly wrap nihilistic energy, a form of negative energy, around the blade. Void was not an authority or a skill. It was a naturally existing energy. In theory, it could not be nullified by anti-skill. At the same time, he would concentrate soul gluttony onto the sword's edge. By doing so, the nihilistic energy wrapped around the blade would forcibly annihilate the enemy's defensive energy, while soul gluttony would immediately devour the energy that was destroyed. This would form a continuous loop of destruction and absorption, a mechanism that, in theory, could break through any defense. Rimuru decided to test this hypothesis immediately and swung his sword at Veldonava. What followed was astonishing. With a soft cutting sound, the once indestructible barrier around Veldonava was cleanly sliced open. Even Veldonava himself showed clear surprise, demanding to know what Rimuru had just done. Rimuru was just as shocked internally, but on the surface he maintained the composure of a dominant fighter. In response to Veldonava's question, he provocatively christened his new move, saying he had just used a technique called Void Devouring Collapse Blade, a name that combined Void, Devour, Nihility Collapse, and swordsmanship. The significance of this success was enormous. This was only the most basic form of an idea born in the moment, with plenty of room to evolve into a true, ultimate technique. Even so, it had already shattered Veldonava's proud combination of multi-layer barrier and anti-skill. It proved that Rimuru's attacks could truly affect a god. What had once been a vague hope of victory now crystallized into something unmistakably real. Staring at the opponent, who had once seemed invincible, Rimuru couldn't help but bear a feral grin. He could win. All right, that was all for this video. This episode was entirely about Rimuru seizing control of the battle and beginning to overwhelm a god. As we mentioned before, the core battle of TenSura Volume 23 was Rimuru versus Veldanava, or, more precisely, the process by which Rimuru, without Ciel's support, rebuilt his confidence. Rimuru's true strength had already far surpassed Veldonava during the era of the end of space-time. The only version of Veldonava who could truly rival him was the all-unified Veldonava, the one who still possessed nihility collapse, omniscience, and omnipotence. So, how could the fight still feel tense? The author's solution was elegant. Remove Ciel. With Ciel gone, Rimuru had to rapidly rediscover and understand his own power, turning the battle itself into a challenge of self-recognition. His transformation into the Satoru form perfectly enabled that process. Of course, when a god is pushed into a corner, he resorts to even more extreme measures. In our next episode, Veldonava would attempt to reset the entire world, only to be forcibly stopped by Ciel as her true plan finally began to surface. The next episode would be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.